ASP.NET Core startup process. What exactly is the procedure followed by ASP.NET Core for eventually launching a web-based application out of a console-based application? If you remember, I have shown you there is something called as main, the entry point method in every ASP.NET Core application. So even if it is a web-based application, yes, it all starts with core. It starts with main only. We have a program class and it has main, the entry point method. And this is actually doing lot of stuff for us, which is launching the web server and also at the same time doing lot of initialization so that the request can be processed properly and a response can be generated. So how is all that working? All theory is what we need to understand. So yes, that is the main primary focus of today's class. And of course, eventually we are going to get into understanding dependency injection, which is the most important aspect of ASP.NET Core web-based application. Everything is going to be injected and we will have loose coupling between them. But before we get into dependency injection, we need to understand this iWeb host and iWeb host builder interfaces. So ASP.NET apps configure and launch a host. Now host is what? Some application. Remember, host is a very generic term. It is hosting something. Host is just an application. The host is responsible for app startup and lifetime management. The application startup and lifetime management is taken care by the host. So console based host application, you can think like that. So in context of ASP.NET, we have got two host APIs. One is the web host and the other is the generic host. Yes, web host, as the name implies, is going to be suitable only for web based application. But then we also have something called as generic host, a separate class altogether, which is hosting for non-web apps, applications which run in background without any UI. Yes, as on today from 2.2 version of ASP.NET Core, these two are separate classes. But eventually Microsoft is planning to merge them in the future versions. So everything will become generic host thereafter. But that doesn't really matter. The basic procedure of startup is going to remain same even after merging the content of web host into generic host. So now we want to understand here the very core functionality of how the whole startup of an ASP.NET Core application happens. And this is the auto-generated code. And just for the sake of simplicity, here it is using lambda syntax. I want to just make it simple. I would remove the lambda syntax. Basically, lambda implies return. So I would just cut this, put it like this, and I'll say return. It's one and the same. The result is same, no difference. So again, we have got create web host builder. Like we had create web host builder, basically this is the method called from main. On create web host builder, build is called. Build is further calling run. What is the meaning of each one of these? What exactly is iWeb host builder? Where is web host builder coming into the scene? Where is web host coming into the scene? Let us understand these types first. So we have two classes, web host and web host builder. There are two things you should remember. So iWeb host represents a configured web host and iWeb host builder is responsible for building that iWeb host. iWeb host builder builds a iWeb host and iWeb host has a build method and that method is actually responsible for building iWeb host, which hosts a web application. So here you see we are calling build on iWeb host builder and this Build in turn is returning what? iWebhost. And iWebhost.run is executed. Just I'm breaking up into pieces. Same one line, I'm just splitting in multiple lines. So first we are getting the iWebhost builder through create web host builder. Now create web host builder internally is again using create default builder of web host. Now what is this web host? Web host provides convenience methods for creating instance of iWebhost and iWebhost builder. Basically you can treat webhost as a utility class, and it has many static methods, or it has methods which are extended upon it, so that those methods can easily create for you an object which has implemented iWebhost, an object which has implemented iWebhost builder. So objects of these is what we are going to get through the convenience methods of webhost. Remember, webhost is not something which is directly implementing iWebhost. No, don't get confused there. Webhost is just a helper class. So in webhost, there is a ready-made method called as create default builder, to which I pass the command line argument. I am getting the command line argument as it is. The command line arguments are passed here for doing lot of initialization and connecting the startup class to the web host. So basically, create web host, if you see, is returning iWebhost builder only. So I again further do this. iWebhost builder, I put this here, and I say return builder.use startup, and we mention a startup class. But iWebhost builder by itself also returns a builder only. This use, so I'll put it as one more line here. So we are just updating the builder and returning the builder. So I just simplified the code for you to understand more clearly. So create web host builder, as the name goes, is building a iWebhost builder. First, it is doing some default building. I'm going to explain you what is this default web builder. Default builder is internally doing. It is doing lot of stuff actually. It is doing lot of initialization. So create default builder does all the initialization, and we get the builder reference, and to that builder I am attaching a startup class, and rest of the programming is all in startup class. So that builder we are returning here, and that builder we get here, which is used for building a web host, and web host is executing. Basically, this is launching our web server, we can say that. The web server gets launched here, and most important, the code is blocked here until the web server is running. Only when web server is terminated, it will continue and terminate the application. The main ends, the application ends. That's how the whole process works. I hope this is very clear. Just trying to break the code into pieces so that it gives you the proper understanding. Let me explain it to you once again. When my program starts, it enters into main. Like every other console based application, this also enters into main. And let me show you. if this is not executed, I just press Ctrl F5, the program starts and nothing happens. It just ends. Rather, let me change this to the application, that's better. No process is associated with this object and program terminated. But keeping main here, keeping run here makes all the difference. Let me get rid of that first, the certificate issue. So I go to project properties. I'm using Hello World MVC web app and I don't want HTTPS endpoint. Only HTTP endpoint is sufficient. I press Ctrl F5 and now console based application. Properly it runs. So all these things which are happening here are because of this initialization process. So I do not put run. Now let me clarify. As the web server is running, our code is here. When I terminate this, I press Ctrl C. When I terminate this, it will continue and the main ends. Until then, it is stuck here. So I again comment this and you notice that's it. The window opened and closed. So this run is the most important call there. Run is called on what? iWebhost. iWebhost is what? A web server. How is that web server created? With the help of builder. Builder.build creates the web server. But how did we get the builder? By making a call to create web host builder. Create web host builder did what? It used a helper class, built-in class of course, which has a ready-made method create default builder, which is doing lot of action. All that action I'm yet to explain, and gets me the builder reference. Also at the same time, what is important? With this builder reference, we have attached the startup class. Discussion about startup class is the next thing which we have to cover. So same, what we are getting here is builder. We are updating the builder and the updated builder with startup class I am returning here. And that's what is building my complete request response pipeline. Actually speaking, in background there is a lot of dependency code initialization happening, request response pipeline creation is happening, but all that happens only when we actually execute the method run. At the point of run, internally it is going to create an object of startup and the complete request response pipeline will get created for us. Back to the handout. Just a quick overview. Represents a configured web host, a builder for iWebhost. The method build actually builds an object representing iWebhost. iWebhost run method runs the web application and blocks the current thread until the host shut down. Very important. Only when your host is going to be shut down, yes, then only it will continue. Until then it is locked, basically blocked. WebHost is a convenience class. It has lot of methods. I have covered only few here, but it has lot of methods which ultimately gets us the instance of iWebhost and iWebhost builder. And of course, most importantly, with pre-configured defaults. Now let us have a quick overview of what is webhost.createDefaultBuilder doing for us. It returns a new instance of webhost builder class with pre-configured default. That's what I also said here. It creates a new instance of webhost builder and all the pre-configured defaults are done there. What are those defaults? 1. It uses Kestrel as web server and configures it using applications configuration providers. So basically the Kestrel server is loaded over here. Then the content root path is returned by get current directory. So there is a ready-made method whenever we want actually the current directory of our web application, that is set to the current directory. So we are running this Kestrel from some local directory, right? So that directory is going to become the root directory. That initialization is done there. Then it is going to do host configuration. Basically, it is going to read the environmental variables, and the configuring the host requires environmental variables which begin with this syntax: ASP.NET Core underscore. After that, lot of names. So ASP.NET Core underscore environment is one of the configuration variable. But of course, configuration by itself is a separate topic which we are going to learn later. It's going to process all the command line arguments. Then it is going to load application configuration. Remember, first step is host configuration. And now it is going to do application configuration. Application configuration file is appsettings.json. Then you can also have appsettings.development.json, appsettings.production.json. Like that, for different environments, we can have different JSON file. So how to know which JSON file should be used? That comes from the value of this ASP.NET underscore environment. So if ASP.NET underscore environment is development, then the settings from appsettings.development.json is going to be used. So host has been configured with some environment, and based on that the application configuration file will be used. Secret manager, when the application runs development environment using the entry assembly, some secret manager will be loaded. Environmental variables will be loaded. These are all your environmental variables from the operating system. At the operating system, you can set all the variables. Those will be picked up, and then any kind of value from command line argument is going to be picked up. Of course, we have to go more in detail about the initialization, how these app settings and all that stuff is working. We are going to cover that more in detail later. Now also so here also at the time the application loads, the logger is initialized so that logging can be performed. And if at all you are running IIS, it is going to take care of IIS integration, basically base address initialization, the port and port number assignment, all that is also going to happen. And these are all important things happening because of the create default builder. And finally, I told you there is a startup class which returns iWebHostBuilder, which specifies the startup class type, the name of the startup class basically. And by convention, that name is supposed to be startup only. And thereafter, the code in the startup is going to execute. Net, the main is responsible for initialization of the complete startup process. And for that, the primary method used is create default builder. That's the heart. Of course, create default builder only returns builder, and build and then run is actually launching the web server. So that's all in this particular session, and we'll continue with the startup class in next topic.